we're not doing theologianology here, where it's like, let's just jump into Garrigou's mind palace. We go to Garrigou, and with Garrigou, we go to Thomas, not for Thomas or for Garrigou or any Thomist, but because of God and reality. That's why the book, Reality. Garrigou, Thomas, teach me how to see God, how to see reality. And if there's a man of the previous century who believed that reality was knowable, that it was lovable, that it could change your life, that it could fill you with happiness, that God was real, no matter what your perspective, background, struggles, sins, Garrigou-Lagrange stood with that.
Hi friends, I'm Matthew Barrett, founder of Credo and host of the Credo podcast. I'm also the research professor of theology at Trinity Anglican Seminary. If you know me and some of what I've written and love talking about on the podcast, well, then you know my love for Thomas Aquinas. And I thought, wouldn't it be great as a Thomist if I could sit down and bring into the room so many of those Thomists I have learned so much from and benefited from, and put them before you and have conversations with them just like this. Well, it's really my privilege to have here Father Cuddy. He is assistant professor of dogmatic and moral theology at the Dominican House of Studies in D.C. He also does a lot for the Thomistic Institute, and he's becoming quite prolific with some of his own writings. He's edited a slew of books, bringing to the surface so many Thomists from the past. If you missed our first video, you got to go back and watch it. We talked a lot about his little book, Catholic Theology Introduction, in which I was so glad you brought this out. He talks about theology as this sanctified impatience as we're awaiting the beatific vision. You do need to go back and listen to that. You'll really enjoy some of his insights. But he's also the author of this one called Thomas and the Thomists. And I think you'll find this to be not just a celebration of Thomas Aquinas, but also a look into some of his interpreters. One of his books that is coming out very soon, and I can't wait for it, it's called the Summa Illuminated, A Guide to St. Thomas Aquinas' masterpiece. And this is a book that is not only, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not only introducing the Summa, but it's trying to bring out Thomas's own genius in writing it.
It is in a very accessible way. So if intelligent non-experts, that's the audience for the Summa Illuminated.
Excellent. Now, you need to get your hands on those books, but we want to talk about a certain Thomist that I know has been huge influence in you, and I've really been enjoying as well, and that is Father Garrigou. Now, he's written so much. In fact, I was tempted to bring in a large stack of his books from the library and just said, there's no way I could even mention all of them. Not the greatest cover for this edition, I'll be honest, but this book, Reality, A Synthesis of Thomistic Thought, is, I found it quite profound. But he's also written a number of others. His book on one God, his books on Providence, another volume on Predestination, which Thomists care a lot about, and another book on Christ as our Savior, where he starts to get into the weeds of Christology. What am I missing?
Well, it's easy. All of us can miss with Garrigou because, as you said, if to sit here and list, we would take 45 minutes just to read off the books. He's written on the nature of divine revelation. On divine revelation, 2 volumes.
That's right.
He's written about the intersection between philosophy and theology, and that would be the sense of mystery. He's written a lot about the spiritual life because, as you know, Garrigou-Lagrange, Father Garrigou-Lagrange, the 20th century Dominican Thomist master, was not just an ethereal idea brain, but for him, spirituality and sacred doctrine are one and the same movement for the human person. So he's written, if I had somebody that's interested in Garrigou, I would probably recommend a little book called The Three Conversions of the Spiritual Life. It's a tiny book. And as you know, I'm a fan of small books, so I think today people can read them. Not to be confused with the large 2-volume book called The Three Ages of the Interior Life. We're talking the Three Conversions, but it's like a mini summary of who God is and how God changes us and how to grow in holiness. That's like the heart of what Father Garrigou was all about.
Now, you hinted a minute ago that he's this French philosopher, theologian. Talk to us about who he is. What is the context in which he's living and writing as a Thomist?
So he was a very gifted, he was born at the very, very end of the 19th century and died in 1964. So he's basically the first half of the 20th century. He was a Frenchman, handsome, debonair. And there's pictures of him in his youth, all dressed. He was going to be a doctor.
Okay.
Catholic, Christian, didn't really believe. And then one day he had almost like a lightning bolt experience where he realized God is true. He loves me. And I need to give all of myself to him. It was remarkable as a young 19, 20, 21-year-old. And so then he, with his great intensity and simplicity, gave himself to study sacred truth. And he became a Dominican friar, a Dominican priest. And that's where he discovered St. Thomas Aquinas. And so in the early mid-20th century, there's a number of fascinating things happening. There's what we might call the infection of rationalism still within Christian thought. He pushes against that. He wants to emphasize and defend the supernatural gratuitousness of divine faith. He also has to deal with, in reaction to rationalism, a lot of Christians and Catholics, both, all of us, were falling into fideism.
Yeah.
He had to push against that. And he also thought that people had too low of an expectation of what grace could do in our lives here and now. And so he devoted himself to the spiritual life and saying, no. If for us men and for our salvation, the eternal word became man, which is remarkable, then it's possible for us to be conformed and configured to God. So he taught the majority of his life as a mature scholar at the Angelicum in Rome. And he had the chair of spiritual theology, but he taught everything. All of those big books is from his fundamental theology course, his prima pars dogmatic theology courses, his moral theology course, his grace course. So it's because he did nothing for like 50 years but research and teach and write. We are very blessed now to benefit from him. And as I'm sure I know this because we've taught, he's a master of clarity.
He is. That's the thing I've appreciated. And in that way, I think he models almost a contemporary appropriation of Thomas Aquinas. I mean, that was one of the things that first drew me to Thomas himself, was the precision and then the clarity. Yes, you have to get down the vocabulary, which for someone new can be a challenge. But once you do, the clarity there. And when I've picked up Garrigou, I've noticed, there it is again. And there's something about that makes Thomism shine. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, though, there's been, interestingly enough, in the 20th century, some reaction against him. Talk to us about what that's been like. What misconceptions are there? And how might we address those to understand him properly?
So it's interesting. Yes, Garrigou-Lagrange, let's say even up until about 25, 30, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
if you had a Garrigou-Lagrange book you were trying to sell, no one was buying. You could get it for 25 cents. Today, as you've seen when you've looked, you and I have discussed this, trying to find it, like a single book can be like $250.
Empty my bank account.
And the reason why was Garrigou for that period of time, from roughly the mid-20th century up until 20, 30 years ago, it was because he was undeniably the figure in the church, in the Christian circles, most associated with what we might call the Thomist tradition. And the Thomist tradition is a long patrimony, legacy in which people like you and I, and then the greats like Garrigou and Cajetan and John of St. Thomas and Banez,
Yeah.
they study St. Thomas, receive his principles, and then look at, as you said, contemporary questions, concerns, difficulties, and apply it. Now, people thought in the mid-20th century that Garrigou-Lagrange was too rigorously and exclusively Thomist. They didn't think that he was open enough to particularly insights from what we would call today modern philosophy, that he was overly objective. And so with the movement in the early to mid-20th century, certainly in the late 20th century, Garrigou-Lagrange seemed to be passé because he really didn't have a lot of time for philosophers or theologians that he didn't think were really attaining or discovering or pointing to the truth.
Yeah.
And so he seemed very narrow. Now, what's fascinating is that precisely because Garrigou-Lagrange didn't spend a lot of time talking about figures who were famous in their own life but not so famous today, it's precisely that lack of currency and up-to-datedness of the 20th century that makes him so valuable now.
Yeah.
Because he's not tied to passé figures that no one cares about. He was just looking at the truth. And one other thing, see, if you get me talking about the Thomist tradition, is that when you and I both, we're interested in Garrigou, and Garrigou is interested in other Thomists, not because of Garrigou, and not because of other Thomists. So we're not doing theologianology here, where it's like, let's just jump into Garrigou's mind palace. We go to Garrigou, and with Garrigou, we go to Thomas, not for Thomas or for Garrigou or any Thomist, but because of God and reality. That's why the book, Reality. Garrigou, Thomas, teach me how to see God, how to see reality. And if there's a man of the previous century who believed that reality was knowable, that it was lovable, that it could change your life, that it could fill you with happiness, that God was real, no matter what your perspective, background, struggles, sins, Garrigou-Lagrange stood with that.
I think there's a lesson there because when we look at the contemporary theological scene, there can be a lot of that where, and what I'm referring to is what he warned against, where there is a temptation to spend all of our air, all of our footnotes, perhaps, go interacting with the latest, newest theological ideas or theologians, and I think there's something to what he says where actually that's not going to last. And even if some of it is, it's really quite hard to discern. But by going back, and that's one of the things I love about his book, Reality, he opens, it almost just like hits you right in the face. He opens and just goes right for first principles. And that is so different than most textbooks today, where first principles may be missing, or if they're there, they're almost hidden, but they certainly don't begin the whole project. Now, that being said, I know that I don't want to get you in trouble here because this could be a controversial question, but what would you say? So really two questions. One, what is your favorite Garrigou book? And then secondly, is there a book that you would say, if you're new, you should go here?
For Garrigou?
Yeah, and why would that be?
So good question. I would, if I may, just to double down on your principle, just for our listeners and our friends watching, we recall that principles, first principles are like first truths. Why did Garrigou start with first truths, first principles? It wasn't because that was his favorite thing to think about, but because first truths are universally applicable to everything.
That's right.
So if you walk on first principles, no part of reality is inaccessible to you. But if you build on something other than a first principle, your range of contemplation and of love is different. So because of that, my favorite personally favorite book of Garrigou was the first Garrigou book I ever read. And that's the book Predestination.
Okay.
Because the secret is I at one time thought Catholics were Pelagian or semi-Pelagian at best with a capital S. And I thought I'd read every book with predestination in the title. And then a friend of mine and then a mentor kind of recommended, you got to read Garrigou-Lagrange. I thought that sounded like a fungus or so. Well, Garrigou-Lagrange, what is this? And he says, oh, this was the greatest theologian of the 20th century.
But I have to interrupt you because there's a really great nugget here. How old were you?
Oh, so when I read Garrigou, I was 18. So I started, Garrigou, yes, I was, yes.
Let's just be honest, most teenagers are not doing what you were doing.
Yeah, so my parents they were very patient with me. I was a very strange child. It's true. And what I saw with Garrigou's presentation of predestination was that speculative theory, clear distinction, clarity, but it was always united to the spiritual life.
Yeah.
And that applied to his book on divine revelation. What does it mean for God to speak? And we can understand what he says. When he looks at the one God, the first God is one. And you see, it's always the spiritual life, his examples, his humor.
Yeah.
It's all there. But if I had to for personally, my most touching book is the Predestination, because that was the first Garrigou. But if I had to recommend to most,
For the record, to this day, you're not a Pelagian or something.
I am not. Thanks be to that's right. Garrigou didn't corrupt me.
Despite all the caricatures out there, right?
That's right. And so for most people, I would recommend his book Providence.
Okay.
Which is like the speculative version of, it's a less speculative version of predestination. Still very good, rigorous, clear, but it's more accessible. And with Providence, he'll address questions like, well, why pray if God knows everything? What role does suffering have in the Christian life? How does God care? Why do bad things happen to good people? There you see Garrigou, the priest, the pastor, the abbé, the shepherd of souls, drawing out from all of his profound contemplation the spiritual implications. So Providence would be the book I would recommend most.
Okay. Now, I can't resist here. You have to talk to us. I mean, some of our listeners and viewers, that you're speaking their language now, right? Because they're thinking, I want to spend my life in the church. I want to give myself to that. I want to counsel and shepherd and teach the truth to these souls. What is it? Talk to us about his life, because we might read these books and walk away with the impression that, wow, this is like another Thomas Aquinas. This is this colossal mind, but he actually is quite active and involved in the church. What did that look like in his day?
So he was a full and distinguished professor at the Angelicum, which today, it doesn't mean like we do today. You give a 45-minute lecture and everyone laughs and applauds and they leave. It was a written out, very precise Roman European lecture.
Yeah.
So he was first and foremost a professor. And in fact, I once talked to former students of his about what he was like. And they said he was the most gracious, charming, the funniest man. He would make jokes, and he's all in Latin at that time. So they could offer.
Who might be some of his students?
I'm thinking of Father Henchy, Joseph Henchy, a very holy stigmatine priest.
Okay.
But he died. No, there's a few left, but his former students, he died in 1964. Father Henchy knew him at the final kind of years of his life. But the people that knew Garrigou, they're coming to an end. They're gonna be with Garrigou in heaven, hopefully.
I interrupted you though. Go back to the how he was lecturing. I want to hear more.
So they said that when he would sit at the desk, the Europeans sit, and he'd be speaking in Latin. And then when he got very excited about divine truth, he would stand up and switch to Italian because he couldn't help himself. And then when he got really, really excited, he would start walking around. He'd be bumping people and speaking in French.
He sounds like an American.
He does, yes. Now, here's the other thing. He served the Vatican. He once a week he would go to the Vatican and work on theological matters and questions with the Holy See. He was advising the Pope on things. He was writing. He was preaching retreats all over. If you want to read Garrigou's spiritual writings, it's called Knowing the Love of God, published by Ignatius Press and Lighthouse Catholic Media. That's his retreat. He preached that all over the world.
Wow.
But world-renowned, writing thousands of pages of books, writing letters, spiritual direction, and Father Henchy, this priest who has since died, that I was fortunate enough about 20 years ago to corner and ask him what it was like to know Garrigou. He said Father Garrigou was the most humble and approachable man. He said he had no secretary, and if you called his room, he answered himself, and if you said, Father Garrigou, I have questions, he'd say, and come, he'd meet with you, and he would give you, if you, oh, you're going to need this book, he'd give you from his own library books and articles.
Yeah.
And the most touching thing was he had a little box on his desk, Father Henchy remembered, and it's written about, with the words, mes pauvres, my poor ones.
Oh.
And every time he'd meet someone, and usually Americans, because he thought we had a lot of money, he would say, could you give, and he would walk around Rome every afternoon for about an hour, praying his rosary, and all the homeless and the poor of Rome knew him, and he would talk to them and give them money for, because they were poor. So he knew the poor people of Rome by name.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's a very holy, humble man. So what you have is a master philosopher, a master theologian, a master preacher, retreat leader, an intellectual, a man of high regard in the church, in the Vatican.
But he's living.
And the friends of the poor.
Yeah.
This is a man that believed what Jesus said.
It sounds a lot like Christ. I mean, he's actually living out what he's preaching.
And to end, I know we're going longer than maybe we should, but in the testaments written about him after his death, they recalled that, in Dominicans, we live in our own rooms. We live in the priory or a monastery. His neighbors heard one day him scream or shout, and they heard like a noise of a crash.
Yeah.
And they came running and found him, like his papers on the floor. And he was like he had just been assaulted. And he just said, he wouldn't go into details, but he said, God has just shown me that my final years will be very painful.
Oh.
And he said, but I give that to the Lord. And from then on out, he slowly declined and dementia began to set in. And he died living kind of a demented life, very simple, just praying the rosary.
Yeah.
He says if you walked in, you could be the cleaning, the brother just wanting to clean up the room. He'd be like, okay, open your textbook. He wouldn't know where he was when say open up to the metaphysics. But
he thought he was in the classroom.
That's right. But
Poor janitor.
Or the janitors. Oh, okay. But his friends, his disciples who wrote these tributes said that it was fitting, even if painful, and Garrigou accepted it because he knew the truths of the faith are not the result of human brilliance or ingenuity.
No.
And so what better way than that simplicity? Okay, God, I'll be with you even for when I am weak, then I am strong.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You have me emotional just thinking about this. I mean, I often have thought, this is not, new with me. I mean, I've seen this model down through the great tradition that the best theologians are the ones that are the most humble.
Yes.
I think you see that in the life of Augustine in so many ways. And actually, that ending there, it's different, but it does remind me of Thomas Aquinas in some ways as well. Wow, we could go on for another hour, I think, but we better stop. Our viewers have some books to go buy now. And of course, I hate that because it's going to drive up the prices, and they're so rare already. But if you can't find them, you got to go to a library because the libraries still have them. And then we'll put all of the pressure on you to keep bringing out more of his writings. Last question, we'll end with this. I'll leave it with you. Are there publishers out there who are taking that seriously? You mentioned his book, his 2 volumes on divine revelation. Those have come out. Where should people go if they're like wondering, okay, what publishers could I go find that are reproducing his works?
So as in the wonderful world, and I do mean wonderful, it is a publication, it's very complicated.
Yeah.
So today you can get new translations of books that have never been translated, published by Emmaus Academic. and they're available on Amazon wonderfully. But Reality was an old book published by B. Herder in St. Louis, decades ago. And they fell out of print for a while, but then Tan Books, now St. Benedict's Press, had acquired the copyrights to them in like the 80s and 70s, 80s and 90s. Then a European publisher, because they recognized the quality, got the rights, and they've been promising to bring out new editions of the books you want, Matthew, and I want too. But they haven't yet been able to do that. We're waiting.
Yeah. So
there's not a straight answer because many publishers are interested and produce Garrigou.
Okay. Well, we'll end there. Thank you so much for sharing your love of Garrigou with us.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and it's great to be with you.
Now you can fill up on theology each day by visiting credomag.com. There you will find the latest issues of Credo magazine with articles on key doctrines of the faith and regular video interviews with Dr. Matthew Barrett, where he answers some of the toughest theological questions of our day. Be sure to subscribe to Credo Podcasts to join the conversation, a conversation where doctrine matters.